I woke up that morning knowing something had to change, but I never expected it to happen the way it did with a photograph, a dead woman's name, and a man who turned out to be everything my mother had stolen from me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Clara, and for 26 years, I lived in a house that smelled like lavender soap and silence. Our place sat at the end of a dirt road outside Harlan, Kentucky, one of those small towns where everybody knew your business before you did. The nearest grocery store was a 20-minute drive, and the nearest dream was even farther. My mother, Ruth, had raised me alone. No father, no siblings, no explanation. Just the two of us and a house full of rules. Every morning started the same way. I'd hear her footsteps on the hardwood before the sun came up, followed by the clink of her coffee mug and the creak of the screen door as she checked the porch like she was expecting someone who never came. By the time I got downstairs, breakfast was already on the table, eggs, toast, black coffee, and my mother was already dressed, her dark hair pulled tight, her face set like concrete. "You're late," she said, even though I wasn't. "Morning, Mom. Don't forget to drop the rent check at the post office before your shift." "I know. And don't stay chatting with people at the diner. You talk too much." I poured my coffee and sat across from her. The kitchen window faced the hills, and sometimes in the early light, the fog would settle between the ridges like cotton pressed into the cracks of the earth. It was beautiful, I suppose. But beauty stops meaning much when it's the only thing you've ever seen. I worked at Mabel's Diner on Route 38, the kind of place with sticky menus and regulars who came more for company than for food. I'd been waitressing there since I was 17. 9 years. 9 years of refilling coffee, wiping ketchup off tables, and smiling at men who called me sweetheart like they owned the word. That Tuesday morning, I was restocking napkin dispensers when the front door opened and a delivery driver walked in, tall, kind-eyed, maybe a year or two older than me. His name tag said Jack. He carried 2 boxes of paper cups and set them on the counter with a grin. "Morning. You the one who called in the order?" "That's me," I said. "You're early. Figured I'd beat the rain." He glanced out the window at the gray sky. "Doesn't look like I won." I laughed. It was an easy laugh, the kind I didn't get to use very often. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important, the weather, the potholes on Route 38, whether Mabel's pie was better than the one at the gas station 2 towns over. He was warm. Not flirty, just warm. The kind of person who made a room feel less empty. And then I heard the bell above the door again. My mother stood in the entrance, rain dotting her jacket, her eyes locked on the two of us like a hawk spotting a mouse. Jack didn't notice at first. He was mid-sentence, something about blueberry versus pecan, when my mother's voice cut through the air. "Clara, a word." Jack looked up. The smile on his face dimmed. "Mom, this is just the delivery guy. He's dropping off." I said a word. Now. The diner went quiet. Old Earl at the counter looked down at his plate. Brenda, the other waitress, pretended to be very interested in the coffee machine. Jack stepped back, hands raised slightly, like he'd accidentally walked into someone's house uninvited. I'll head out," he said. "Nice meeting you." He left quickly. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. My mother walked over to me, leaned in close, and spoke low enough that only I could hear. "You think I don't see what you're doing, smiling at strangers, letting them get close? I told you what happens when you trust people, Clara. He was delivering cups, Mom. Today it's cups. Tomorrow it's promises. And the day after that, you're alone with a baby and no one to help you. I've been there. I won't let it happen to you." I didn't argue. I never argued. I just nodded, swallowed the anger like I always did, and went back to wiping tables. My mother left without ordering anything, and the diner slowly filled back up with noise and normalcy. But my hands were shaking, and my face was hot, and somewhere deep inside me, something cracked quietly, the way ice cracks on a river before the whole thing gives way. That night, I sat on the porch with my phone in my hand, scrolling through photos my old friend Naomi had posted from Chicago. Naomi and I had been close in high school. She was the loud one, the brave one, the girl who said I'm leaving this town when we were 16 and actually did it. She'd moved to Chicago right after graduation, worked her way through cosmetology school, and now ran a small salon on the north side. Her Instagram was full of city lights, client transformations, deep dish pizza, and a life I could barely imagine. I called her on impulse. She picked up on the second ring. Clara Bennett. Tell me you're not calling to cancel plans we don't even have. I smiled despite myself. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't telling me what to do. She paused. Then, softer. That bad? Same as always. She showed up at the diner today. Embarrassed me in front of a customer because I was talking to the delivery guy. Girl. You're 26 years old. I know. Do you? Because I've been telling you for years to get out of that house. You don't owe her your whole life, Clara. I didn't respond right away. The cicadas were singing in the dark, and somewhere down the road, a dog was barking at nothing. She's all I have, I said finally. No, Naomi replied, her voice firm but kind. She's all you've been allowed to have. There's a difference. The words hit me like a truck. I stayed silent for a long time. Look, she continued, I've got a room opening up in my apartment next month. My roommate's moving out. You could come up here. I could get you a receptionist job at the She'd never let me go. She doesn't have to let you. You're a grown woman, Clara. Start acting like one. We talked for another hour. About Chicago, about the apartment, about what it felt like to walk down a street where nobody knew your name. By the time I hung up, my chest was tight not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The dangerous kind. The kind that made you do stupid, wonderful things. Over the next 2 weeks, I saved every tip I could. I tucked cash into a sock at the bottom of my dresser. I looked up bus schedules online when my mother was asleep. I didn't tell anyone, not Brenda at the diner, not my cousin Lynn, nobody. I knew if my mother caught even a whisper, she'd find a way to stop me. She always did. The night I left, the air smelled like pine and coming rain. My mother had gone to bed early, complaining about her back, and the house was dark except for the dim glow of the kitchen light I'd left on out of habit. I packed one bag: clothes, a toothbrush, my savings, and an old photo I'd found years ago tucked inside a Bible in my mother's closet. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like me, standing beside a man I'd never seen. They were smiling, arms around each other, and on the back, someone had written R and M Gatlinburg, 1997. I'd asked my mother about it once. When I was 14, she'd snatched it from my hands and told me to never go through her things again. She didn't explain who the man was. She didn't have to. The look on her face said everything: fear, rage, and something else. Something like grief. I took the photo with me that night. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the answer was waiting for me somewhere outside this town. I left a note on the kitchen table, next to the creamer she used every morning. Mom, I love you. I'm sorry, I have to go. Please don't be angry. I'll call you when I'm settled. I stared at the note for a full minute, wondering if I should tear it up, crawl back to bed, and pretend the last 2 weeks had been a fever dream. But then I thought about the diner, and the delivery driver, and the look on my mother's face when she told me to stop smiling at strangers. And I picked up my bag and walked out the back door. The bus station in town was just a bench and a sign under a flickering streetlight. I sat there for 40 minutes, my bag on my lap, my heart hammering so loud, I was sure the whole county could hear it. When the Greyhound finally pulled up, I climbed on, found a window seat near the back, and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. The town disappeared behind me, first the gas station, then the church, then the hills, and finally the fog. I cried for the first hour. Quietly. Not because I was sad, but because leaving the only person who'd ever loved me felt like pulling a tooth with my bare hands, painful, bloody, but necessary. By dawn, the landscape had flattened into highways and farmland, and the bus hummed steadily north through Indiana. I watched the sunrise turn the sky orange and gold, and somewhere between Louisville and Indianapolis, I fell asleep. When I woke up, The skyline of Chicago was rising out of the haze like a promise. Naomi picked me up at the bus station in a bright yellow coat, grinning like I'd just won something. "You actually did it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I didn't think you would." Neither did I. Her apartment was on the third floor of a brick building in Lincoln Park. Small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a fire escape that looked out over a courtyard filled with string lights. My room had a bed, a dresser, and a window that faced the street. I could hear traffic, music, voices, a city breathing around me. I stood there for a long time, just listening, feeling the strangeness of it settle over me. That first week was overwhelming. The noise, the speed, the way people moved like they all had somewhere urgent to be. I got the receptionist job at Naomi's salon and spent my days answering phones, booking appointments, and learning the rhythms of a life I'd only seen on screens. The clients were kind. The other stylists were loud and funny. And for the first time in years, nobody told me who I could talk to or when I should come home. But every night, I called my mother. And every night, she answered the same way. "You made your choice, Clara. Mom, please. I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. You left. That's all there is." Click. It was the same conversation, or lack of one, over and over. I tried sending flowers. She didn't acknowledge them. I tried writing a letter. It came back unopened. Each rejection stung, but I kept going, because stopping felt like drowning. 3 weeks into my new life, Naomi came home one evening and handed me a flyer. The salon owner's friend runs a home health agency on the west side. They're hiring care aides, no experience needed. The pay's better than reception, and you'd be great at it. I looked at the flyer. Home health aide? You basically help elderly patients with daily stuff, meds, meals, company. You've been doing that your whole life, just without getting paid. She wasn't wrong. I applied the next day and got a callback within the week. The interview was at a small office on North Kedzie, a converted brownstone with a green door and a brass nameplate that read Mercer Home Health Services. The woman who interviewed me was warm and practical. She liked that I'd cared for my mother, liked that I was patient, liked that I didn't flinch when she described the harder parts of the job. She offered me a position on the spot. "Your first client is a retired gentleman on Lakeview," she told me. "Lives alone, recovering from a hip replacement. Name's Martin Hale. 62 years old, quiet man, very private. He might take a while to warm up, but don't take it personally." I showed up at Martin Hale's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. The building was old but well kept, with a courtyard entrance and a doorman who nodded politely. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, checked the apartment number twice, and knocked. The door opened slowly. A tall man stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane. His hair was silver, his face weathered but handsome in the way certain older men are, like life had carved him rather than worn him down. His eyes were sharp, assessing, and guarded. "You must be the new aide," he said. "Clara Bennett." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hale." He let me in, without much enthusiasm. The apartment was modest bookshelves, lined with old novels, a record player on a side table, a kitchen that smelled like black tea and toast. I began my routine, checking his medication, helping him with a few exercises the physical therapist had assigned, preparing a light lunch. He didn't talk much. Mostly, he sat in his armchair by the window, reading or staring out at the street. I didn't push. My mother had taught me at least that much. Some people carry their silence like armor. But over the following days, he began to soften. He'd ask me small things: where I was from, how I ended up in Chicago, whether I liked the city. I told him what I could. That I'd grown up in Kentucky. That I'd come here for a fresh start. That I was still figuring things out. "Figuring things out is most of life," he said one afternoon, sipping his tea. "The people who say they have it all sorted are usually lying." I laughed. My mom would disagree. She had a rule for everything. Sounds exhausting. It was. But she meant well, I think. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. The ones who love hardest are usually the ones who are most afraid. There was something in the way he said it, something personal, weighted, that made me wonder who he'd been afraid of losing. It happened on my 7th visit. I was tidying up his living room, straightening cushions, picking up a few books he'd left on the floor when I noticed a framed photograph on the shelf by the record player. It was old, slightly faded, but the image was unmistakable. A young woman with dark hair standing in front of a cabin surrounded by trees. She was laughing, her head tilted back, one hand resting on her stomach. I knew that face. It was my mother. Not just someone who looked like her, it was her. Same cheekbones, same crooked smile, same small scar near her left eyebrow from a childhood fall she'd told me about exactly once. She was younger, maybe 20, and she looked happy in a way I had never seen before. Genuinely, completely happy. My hand started shaking. I picked up the frame and stared at it, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Ruth Gatlinburg, June 1997. The same handwriting. The same year. The same place as the photo I'd found in the Bible. Mr. Hale, I said, my voice barely steady. Who is this woman? He looked up from his book and saw what I was holding. The color drained from his face. He didn't speak for what felt like a full minute. Where did you find that? He asked. It was on your shelf. Mr. Hale, who is she? He set the book down slowly, carefully, the way you'd set down something fragile. His jaw tightened. Her name was Ruth. She was my fiancée. A long time ago. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. What happened to her? He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. She died. 26 years ago. Her mother called me one night and said there'd been a car accident on the mountain road outside Harlan. Ruth had been driving to her aunt's house. The car went off the embankment. They told me she didn't survive. That's not true, I whispered. He frowned. Excuse me? She's alive. My voice broke on the word. Her name is Ruth Bennett. She lives in Harlan, Kentucky. She's my mother. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Martin stared at me, really stared, not at my face, but into it, searching for something he was terrified to find. His hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. That's impossible, he said. Her mother told me. Her mother lied. He shook his head. No, I went to the town. They said the funeral had already happened. Her mother showed me the death certificate. His voice cracked. I grieved that woman for 26 years. I reached into my bag with trembling hands and pulled out the photograph, the one from my mother's Bible. The man in the picture was younger, stronger, but the eyes were the same. The same eyes that were now staring at me, filling with something too big for the room to hold. Is this you? I asked, holding it out. He took it. His hands were shaking so badly the photo trembled between his fingers. He turned it over. Read the back. R and M Gatlinburg, 1997. Then he looked up at me, and the walls he'd built around himself for 2 decades crumbled in a single breath. She was pregnant, he said, his voice barely audible. When I left for Chicago, she told me she thought she might be. I told her I'd come back. I told her I'd send money, that I'd find work, that we'd build a life. But then her mother called, and he pressed a hand over his eyes. I never went back, I believed her. God help me, I believed her. She never told me about you, I said, tears streaming down my face. She never told me I had a father. Martin's face collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet devastation, the way a house settles into the ground after years of standing alone. He reached for me, then stopped, as if he wasn't sure he had the right. You're my daughter, he said. Not a question. A realization. I think so, I said. I didn't know until right now. I swear I didn't know. For a moment, we just stood there, a father and a daughter, strangers to each other, separated by a lie that had outlived the woman who told it. Then he reached out again, and this time he didn't stop. He pulled me into his arms, and I let him. He smelled like tea and old books, and his arms were strong despite the cane, and he held me like he was trying to make up for every birthday, every Christmas, every scraped knee, and first day of school he'd missed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't know you existed." "It's not your fault," I managed through sobs. "It's not your fault." When we finally pulled apart, his eyes were red, and mine were worse. He sat back down heavily, staring at the photograph again. "Your grandmother," he said quietly. "She never approved of me. I was working construction then. No college, no money, no family name. She said I'd ruin Ruth's life. She said I wasn't good enough. So she told you my mother was dead. And she told your mother I'd abandoned her." He paused. "That's why Ruth never tried to find me, isn't it? She thought I left and never looked back." The pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. My grandmother, the woman who'd died when I was 4, the one my mother barely spoke of, had played them both. She'd told Martin that Ruth died in a car crash. She'd told Ruth that Martin had disappeared, that he wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. Both of them had spent 26 years believing a lie. Both of them had grieved someone who was still alive. And I had grown up in the wreckage. "We have to tell her," I said. Martin looked at me, fear and hope at war in his eyes. "She might not want to see me. After all this time. She deserves to know the truth." "We both do." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "When?" "This weekend. I'll drive us." We left Chicago on Saturday morning, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror as we crossed into Indiana. Martin sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in his lap, staring at the road, like he was seeing two timelines at once, the life he'd lived and the one that had been taken from him. I drove in silence, gripping the wheel, trying not to think about what would happen when my mother opened that door. We arrived in Harlan just after noon. The town looked the same as always, quiet, green, unchanged. The mountains rose on either side like walls, and the air smelled like it always did, like pine and wood smoke and standing still. I pulled up to the house. The porch light was on even though it was daytime, my mother's old habit, the one she said was for safety, but that I now understood differently. She was always waiting. Always watching. Always afraid someone would leave or someone would arrive. I got out first. Martin followed, leaning on his cane, his face pale. When I knocked on the door, the sound echoed through the still afternoon. Footsteps inside. The creak of the floorboard near the hallway. Then the door opened. My mother stood there in her house dress, dish towel over her shoulder, her face caught between surprise and anger at seeing me. But then her eyes moved past me, to the man standing behind me, and everything changed. Her hand flew to her mouth. The dish towel fell to the floor. "Martin?" she breathed. He nodded. His eyes were already glistening. "Hello, Ruth." She stumbled backward as if the name itself had pushed her. Her face went white, then red, then something beyond color entirely, a raw, open wound of recognition. "No," she whispered. "No, you left. You left us." "I didn't leave," he said, his voice thick. "I was told you were dead." My mother's knees gave way. I caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to the nearest chair. She was trembling, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Mom," I said, kneeling in front of her. "Grandma lied. She told him you died in a car accident. She told you he left. None of it was true." "That's not," she wouldn't, but even as she said it, I could see the truth settling behind her eyes. The pieces clicking into place. Years of anger and grief suddenly rearranging themselves into a picture she'd never allowed herself to see. "She hated me," Martin said from the doorway. "She told me I wasn't good enough. And when I left to find work so I could come back and marry you, she called me and said you were gone. She said the funeral had already passed, she wouldn't even let me see a grave." My mother's face crumbled. Not in anger, in devastation. She pressed both hands to her face and wept. Not the quiet, controlled tears I was used to seeing. Deep, ragged sobs that shook her whole body, the sound of a woman realizing that the story she'd been living for 26 years was a lie. "She told me you knew about the baby," my mother said through her tears. "She said you didn't want us. She said you'd moved on, found someone else, that you told her to keep me away." "I never said that. I never knew about Clara until a week ago." 26 years. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. 26 years, I hated you for leaving. And I spent 26 years mourning you. The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock and my mother's breathing, ragged and uneven. I stood between them, the woman who had kept me too close, and the man who hadn't known I existed, and felt the weight of a lie that had shaped all three of our lives. "I'm sorry," my mother said finally, looking up at me. "I should have told you about him. I should have tried to find the truth instead of hiding behind my mother's words. I was young. I was scared. And by the time I was old enough to question it, I'd been angry so long it felt easier than hoping." "You kept me locked away," I said. My voice wasn't angry, just honest. "You made me afraid of the world because you were afraid of it." She nodded, tears still falling. "I know. I see that now." Martin stepped closer. He didn't reach for her, not yet. But he stood near enough that she could feel his presence, the warmth of someone who'd once loved her standing close again after a lifetime apart. "We can't fix 26 years, he said quietly. "But we can stop wasting whatever time we have left." My mother looked up at him. Her eyes were red, swollen, but beneath the pain there was something I hadn't seen in her face since I was very young. Recognition. Not just of the man in front of her, but of the woman she'd been before fear had taken over. "I used to be brave," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I remember." Nobody moved for a long time. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust in the air, making the room glow soft and gold. The house that had felt like a prison my entire life suddenly felt smaller, not confining, but intimate. Like the walls were leaning in to listen. 2 months later, I stood in the doorway of Martin's apartment in Chicago, packing a box of supplies for the salon where I'd started training as an apprentice stylist. Naomi had promoted me from reception, and I was learning fast highlights, layers, color theory, the strange intimacy of touching a stranger's hair and making them feel beautiful. I was good at it. Better than I expected. Martin was in the kitchen, making tea the same way he always did, slow, methodical, 1 spoon of sugar. His cane leaned against the counter, used less each week as his hip healed. On the shelf by the record player, 2 photographs now stood side by side. The old one of my mother laughing in Gatlinburg, and a new one, taken just last month, the 3 of us on my mother's porch in Harlan, squinting into the sun. My mother stood between us, one hand on Martin's arm, the other on mine. She wasn't smiling, exactly. But her face was open, unguarded. Like a door that had been locked for years, finally left ajar. She'd started calling every Sunday. Not to scold, not to warn, just to talk. About the garden, about the weather, about the neighbor's dog that kept digging under her fence. Small things. But they were ours, and they were real, and every conversation ended the same way. "I love you, Clara. I love you too, Mom." Martin and my mother weren't together, not like that, not yet. But they talked on the phone, sometimes, carefully, like 2 people learning to walk again after a long illness. He told me once that he didn't need her to love him back. He just needed her to know he'd never stopped. We'd done a DNA test. The results came back on a Tuesday morning while I was at the salon, and I'd sat in the break room staring at my phone for 10 minutes before I could open the email. When I did, the number on the screen blurred through my tears. 99. 98% probability of paternal match. I called him immediately. "It's confirmed," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, in a voice so quiet, I almost missed it. "I already knew, sweetheart. I knew the moment I saw your face." That evening, I stood at the window of my room in Naomi's apartment, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. Chicago was loud and bright and imperfect, and I loved it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine, the first thing I'd ever chosen for myself. I thought about my mother, alone in that house in Harlan, learning to let go one phone call at a time. I thought about Martin, drinking tea in his quiet apartment, a man who'd spent half his life mourning someone who was still breathing. I thought about my grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, who had decided that love wasn't worth the risk and had burned down 2 lives to prove it. And I thought about myself, the girl who had once been too afraid to talk to a delivery driver, now standing in a city of millions, building something new from the ruins of a lie. The truth didn't erase 26 years. It didn't undo the loneliness, the guilt trips, the locked doors, or the silence. But it cracked them open, just enough for light to get through. And sometimes, that's all you need, not a perfect ending, but a crack, a beginning. A door left slightly open, letting in the cold, bright air of a life you were always meant to live. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. Soft, unhurried, covering the city in white like a blank page. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could write whatever came next.